Fog clung to the jagged cliffs like a living shroud, muffling the sound of waves crashing below. The wind carried whispers, some said they were the voices of those who had vanished. This island, small and unassuming on the map, had earned a reputation far darker than its size suggested. Travelers spoke of it in hushed tones, sailors crossed themselves when passing its waters, unwilling even to anchor near its rocky shore. They called it many things, cursed, haunted, forbidden. But no one could deny its magnetic pull. Something about it demanded attention, even as it repelled life. The story begins not with violence or crime, but with absence. People went to this island, full of hope and ambition, and they simply disappeared. Families seeking a new start vanished without leaving a trace, leaving only personal belongings scattered like breadcrumbs to nowhere. Journal entries and letters written by those who dared step foot here ended abruptly, often mid-sentence, as if the words themselves were swallowed along with the writers. One settler, a young man named Thomas Whitaker, had written to his brother, "We will be free here, far from the city's noise, far from the debts that haunt us. The land is fertile and wild. I feel alive for the first time." Weeks later, his brother received only a small parcel, Thomas's shoes, perfectly intact, lying alone on the sand. Nothing else remained. Some tried to rationalize these disappearances. Perhaps the terrain was treacherous, the cliffs unstable, the tides unpredictable. Perhaps the island's forests harbored hidden predators or deadly plants. But these explanations never accounted for the complete vanishing of entire households, leaving behind nothing more than overturned furniture or the faint scent of smoke in an abandoned cabin. A pattern began to emerge, though no one could articulate it clearly. Every new settler faced the same inexplicable fate, and every attempt at habitation ended in mystery. The island had a way of drawing people in. Stories spoke of travelers arriving with cautious curiosity, only to succumb to a strange compulsion to explore deeper, to linger longer. They would write of hearing laughter in the distance, distant figures moving just beyond the trees, or shadows that darted across the shoreline, but when they tried to confront these illusions, they found nothing. And yet, these fleeting glimpses left a mark on the psyche. Some returned from brief visits changed, silent, haunted, unable to articulate what they had seen. It was as if the island fed on curiosity, feeding a slow-growing obsession that none could resist. Early explorers' journals hint at the island's first mysterious behaviors. Captain Elbridge Morris wrote in 1742 of noticing that, "The fog rolls in thicker here, as if it were alive, curling around us, refusing to release its grip." Others recorded strange alignments of trees or inexplicable noises that echoed like human voices through the night. Some claimed the soil itself felt uneven, almost as if it shifted subtly beneath their feet. No one knew whether these were natural phenomena or the whisperings of something more sinister. Each description ended with a note of unease, a warning to future visitors that went largely unheeded. By the late 18th century, word of the island's peculiar danger had begun to spread among the coastal settlements. Merchants, farmers, and even families seeking escape from political unrest found themselves caught between fascination and fear. Many attempted to colonize it, believing their resolve and ingenuity would protect them. But the island, patient and indifferent, continued to claim lives with a dispassionate regularity. Each disappearance was sudden, often preceded by subtle, almost imperceptible signs: a missing tool, a shadow at the cabin window, the faint scent of decay in the air. By the time the first screams were heard, if anyone survived to hear them at all, the victims had already vanished. And so the island developed a reputation that would persist for centuries. It became a place that existed in the collective imagination as much as on any map, a dark promise, a seductive enigma, a reminder that not all land is meant for human occupation. Those who told stories of the vanished settlers did so cautiously, aware that their words might attract unwanted attention, but compelled by the need to warn others. The question lingered in every conversation, every whispered tale: why did the island choose certain people? Why were the settlers compelled to arrive, only to disappear? And most terrifying of all, would the island ever stop taking, or was it an eternal, silent predator, waiting patiently for its next visitors? As night fell over the jagged cliffs, the wind seemed to carry a mournful melody, half memory, half threat. The island, cloaked in darkness, remained unchanged. Its secrets lay buried in fog and shadow, untouched by time, teasing the living with the haunting reminder that some places on earth do not welcome intruders. And yet, for all its danger, the lure remained irresistible. Somewhere, another ship approached, its passengers unaware of the legacy they were about to inherit. They were drawn by the same compulsion that had claimed countless lives before them, stepping into a story that had no intention of ending. Maps from centuries past offer a strange insight into the island's early reputation. To most cartographers, it appeared as a modest landmass in the middle of a turbulent sea, unremarkable except for the jagged cliffs that marked its perimeter. But sailors who dared to approach recorded something different. They spoke of unnatural fogs, sudden storms, and waters that seemed to resist their vessels. These accounts were dismissed by the authorities of the time as exaggerations, tall tales meant to frighten the superstitious. Yet, the consistency of these reports suggested something more than coincidence. Over time, the island became an enigma, a location that existed in the liminal space between reality and legend. The earliest recorded sighting dates back to the late 16th century. An expedition led by Captain Ferdinand Dalrymple approached cautiously, documenting the cliffs and rocky coves in meticulous detail. His logs mention a strange feeling of unease among his crew, a heaviness in the air that seemed to press upon their minds. He described, with growing anxiety, how compasses malfunctioned intermittently and how animals aboard the ship acted erratically, refusing to set foot on the shore. Yet, curiosity prevailed. A small landing party went ashore, only to return hours later shaken and silent. They refused to explain what had happened, and Captain Dalrymple's log ends abruptly, mid-sentence, with the chilling notation, "We are not alone here, and I fear the island knows." Over the next century, explorers, traders, and settlers made sporadic attempts to understand or inhabit the island. Each expedition left behind traces, notes, sketches, rudimentary shelters, but none endured. An English trader named Samuel Harrington described the island as a land of paradoxes, fertile soil yet impossible crops, calm beaches yet storm-tossed seas. He noted the presence of strange flora, some resembling known species but with subtle, disturbing differences. Leaves were unusually large, colors unnaturally bright, and the air carried a faint but persistent metallic tang. Even the sun seemed hesitant to shine fully on certain parts of the island, as if the light itself recoiled from the land. Stories of early disappearances began to circulate. A group of fishermen attempted to settle for the season, bringing families and livestock. Within weeks, the livestock vanished, leaving no tracks, no signs of predators. The fishermen returned to their cabins to find their homes ransacked, personal items displaced, yet no evidence of intrusion. One of the survivors, a young woman named Eliza Trent, recorded her terror in a journal. "It watches us, though I cannot see it. I hear whispers in the trees, but the trees hold no mouths." Her final entry is undated. She disappears shortly afterward, leaving behind only a hastily scribbled map pointing to the island's inner cove. Whether she fled or was taken remains a mystery to this day. By the late 18th century, the island's mythos had grown. Local fishing communities spoke of it with a mix of awe and fear. They told tales of lights appearing at night, moving across the cliffs as if alive. Ships passing nearby often returned with tales of eerie music, untraceable smoke rising from the trees, and the sensation of being watched by unseen eyes. Scholars and mapmakers began to add annotations: "Here be danger, avoid after sundown, settlers vanish without trace." Yet despite, or perhaps because of, these warnings, the island attracted individuals seeking fortune, adventure, or escape. The island's geography only heightened its ominous reputation. Narrow coves, hidden caves, and sudden cliffs created natural traps. Even experienced sailors struggled to navigate its shoreline, with currents that could tear a small boat apart in moments. But it was not only physical danger that lurked. Contemporary observers remarked on subtle phenomena: compasses spinning without reason, echoes of voices that belonged to no one, and shadows moving independently of light. In some accounts, explorers described finding settlements abandoned mid-task, with meals half-prepared, tools left in place, and yet every inhabitant gone. It was as if time itself had swallowed them whole. Despite, or perhaps because of, its history of vanished visitors, the island remained irresistible. It held a peculiar allure for those desperate for reinvention or riches. Entrepreneurs, scientists, and dreamers alike attempted to stake a claim, often arriving with meticulous plans and unshakable confidence. Yet the island seemed to respond selectively, luring some with the promise of prosperity and swallowing them with equal subtlety. Letters sent back to family and friends often hinted at an emerging pattern. The more hopeful and ambitious the settlers, the more violently the island seemed to respond. And still, the questions remained: was it nature, coincidence, or something beyond human comprehension? Was the island merely dangerous, or was it alive, in some incomprehensible way, and conscious of its intruders? By the end of this period, the island had transformed from a mere landmass into a legend. Its story became a cautionary tale, whispered around campfires and in taverns. Sailors avoided it when possible, parents warned children against dreaming of settling there, and yet, despite centuries of fear, it continued to call to the curious. The stage was being set for the first modern attempts at settlement, where the island's secrets would collide violently with human ambition. And in that collision, the true horror of what awaited anyone daring to live there would slowly begin to unfold, leaving questions that remain unanswered to this day. By the early 19th century, the first determined settlers arrived, each carrying dreams heavier than their luggage. Among them was the Mitchell family, Jonathan, a farmer from the mainland, his wife Clara, and their 2 young children. They had come seeking a fresh start, away from the overcrowded ports and the whispers of debt collectors who haunted their town. Jonathan's letters back home were filled with hope. The land is wild but fertile. We will build a home, raise our children in peace. This place is ours. But peace on the island was an illusion. Within days, they began noticing things that unsettled them: livestock disappearing in the night, tools moved or broken, and fleeting shadows among the trees that vanished the moment anyone looked directly at them. The Mitchells were not alone in their struggles. Across the island, other settlers arrived with plans of self-sufficiency and prosperity. There was Elijah Cartwright, a widower seeking a new beginning after the tragic loss of his wife, and Sarah Bellamy, a young woman hoping to cultivate herbs she believed had medicinal value. Each person carried a history, a personal trauma that made them vulnerable to the island's subtle manipulations. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the island began to test them. A door left closed would be found ajar the next morning. Meals prepared and set on tables vanished overnight. Footprints appeared in patterns that defied logic, some too large, some impossibly small, and some that seemed to crisscross as if invisible entities were moving among them. The tension escalated quietly, a slow-burning pressure that gnawed at nerves and sanity. At first, the settlers tried rational explanations. Perhaps raccoons or wild dogs were responsible. Maybe the soil, the rocks, or the wind had shifted objects and scattered belongings. But as days turned into weeks, the anomalies intensified. One night, Clara Mitchell awoke to the sound of her children whispering in the darkness, even though both had been asleep in their room. When she rushed to them, they were gone. Jonathan searched frantically, calling out across the island, but only silence answered. By dawn, he found their small cabin empty, doors wide open, belongings untouched. The footprints leading into the forest abruptly stopped, as if the earth itself had swallowed them. Elijah Cartwright, witnessing the Mitchells' disappearance, documented his experience in increasingly frantic letters. I do not know what watches us. I hear the rustle of footsteps that do not belong to any living creature. The shadows move when I am not looking. We are being observed. And yet, there is no one. His words reveal a pattern. The more settlers tried to understand the island, the more it seemed to respond, shifting its landscape, its sounds, its very atmosphere to disorient them. Those who attempted to track the missing were themselves claimed, vanishing without trace. It became a silent rule: the island would allow you to exist for a brief moment, only to erase your presence entirely. By the third month, the settlers who remained began to fracture under the psychological weight. Fear became tangible, poisoning interactions and breeding paranoia. Sarah Bellamy recounted seeing figures at the edge of her vision, people she recognized from other settlements, frozen in expressions of terror, standing motionless among the trees. When she approached, they melted into nothingness. Others reported hearing whispers, naming them personally, describing their fears aloud before they themselves could speak. The island seemed to know the intimate details of every soul it claimed, preying on hope, grief, and desire alike. It was not merely a land to be conquered, it was a predator, and its prey was unprepared. The disappearances did not come at random. Observers noted a subtle timing, a rhythm to the vanishings. It was always after moments of perceived triumph, a newly planted crop, a repaired roof, a meal prepared with pride. The island, if it could be called that, seemed to resent human achievement. It tested the settlers, drew them in with the promise of success, only to snatch it away when they believed they had secured a foothold. Survivors' notes describe a growing dread that seeped into every action: the sound of leaves rustling would freeze them in place, and even the laughter of a child nearby could trigger terror. The psychological toll was relentless, creating tension that was almost physical. Despite these warnings, new settlers continued to arrive. Word of available land, fertile soil, and potential prosperity spread through neighboring communities. Outsiders dismissed rumors of danger as exaggeration or superstition. They arrived with fresh optimism, only to encounter the same unexplainable phenomena. The island seemed to recognize newcomers immediately, marking them as targets. Some theorized that the vanishings were the result of natural hazards, sinkholes, quicksand, or hidden coves, but these explanations never fit the entire pattern. Entire households, including livestock and personal belongings, vanished as if the island demanded nothing less than total submission. By the end of the first year, the tally of the vanished had reached a terrifying number. Families, single settlers, and even experienced outdoorsmen had been claimed. The remaining inhabitants were broken, haunted by sleepless nights and constant fear. They whispered among themselves, exchanging fragmented theories: perhaps the island was cursed, perhaps it housed an unknown predator, perhaps it was alive in some inexplicable, sentient way. Each theory carried its own horror, yet none could explain the precise mechanism of disappearance. There was no evidence of struggle, no human intervention, no natural calamity visible. The island simply took, leaving behind an emptiness that was palpable and suffocating. Amid the chaos, small pockets of humanity tried to resist. Makeshift watchtowers were erected, fires were kept burning through the night, and teams were organized to patrol the perimeter. Yet these measures were futile. The island's influence seemed to extend beyond physical limits. It manipulated perception, creating shadows that were not shadows, noises that were not noises, and visions that felt terrifyingly real. Fear became a language, a shared understanding among the survivors, binding them together even as it eroded their sanity. The island had become not just a location, but a force, an unspoken law they could not defy. And then, as the first settlers' hope waned completely, the unthinkable occurred: Jonathan Mitchell himself vanished. He had gone to check the perimeter, armed with nothing but a lantern and a determination to protect what remained of his family's belongings. When the other settlers returned to the path he had taken, they found only footprints that led into dense forest, and ended abruptly. No trace of Jonathan or his lantern was ever recovered. In that moment, it became undeniable: the island did not discriminate by age, gender, or strength. It was patient, deliberate, and thorough. Every human who sought to settle here would face the same fate. The question hung in the air like the omnipresent fog: why? And perhaps more importantly, could anyone ever return to tell the tale? By the time the survivors of the early settlements began to retreat, whispers about the island had evolved into fully fledged legends. Locals spoke of it with a mixture of fear and awe, passing stories from one generation to the next like sacred warnings. Some claimed the land itself was cursed, punished by a force beyond human understanding. Others hinted at darker, more specific entities, spirits of the vanished, restless guardians, or even an intelligence that fed on human ambition. Whatever the explanation, one thing was clear: the island was alive in the imagination, if not in reality, and its reputation was impossible to ignore. Fishermen who dared to sail nearby told tales of strange lights flickering at night, moving unnaturally across the cliffs. Some reported hearing music in the wind, a haunting, melodic tune that seemed to beckon those who listened too closely. Survivors of earlier disappearances described visions of figures just beyond the trees, human in shape but impossibly elongated or distorted. The lines between perception and hallucination blurred. No one could agree on what they saw, only that it was real enough to evoke panic and despair. Some insisted it was the work of spirits, others believed it was an environmental anomaly, a natural phenomenon misinterpreted by a fearful mind. Yet the island's terror did not rely on explanation. Its mere presence was enough to unsettle the strongest wills. Among the most persistent legends was that of the Watcher, a supposed sentient presence that observed intruders, studying their habits, fears, and weaknesses before striking. Some settlers swore they had glimpsed it, a shadow in the corner of a room, a reflection in water that moved independently, eyes glinting in the darkness where no living creature should have been. Local lore claimed that those who noticed the Watcher's gaze too directly were never seen again. This story, repeated in hushed tones around fireplaces, became a warning: the island was not only dangerous, it was selective, precise, and patient. Its victims were not random, they were chosen. Anthropologists and historians later collected accounts from these local traditions, piecing together recurring themes. Many cultures that inhabited nearby coastal regions had their own stories of uninhabitable lands, places where humans were not welcome. Some described spirits of ancestors guarding sacred spaces, others told of entities that punished those who overstepped boundaries. The island's reputation fit perfectly into these archetypes: a land that rejected settlement, where human presence was an intrusion and met with lethal consequences. Survivors' testimonies often reflected these same themes, as if ancient warnings had been encoded into human memory, surfacing whenever someone attempted to claim the land as their own. By the mid-19th century, explorers and scientists began to record these legends in official reports, often dismissing them at first but increasingly noting consistencies. One observer remarked, "Whether these tales are of spirits, curses, or the imaginings of fearful minds, the patterns of disappearance are undeniable. Human beings have vanished here repeatedly, and each account, no matter how fantastical, aligns with previous reports." This acknowledgement lent a chilling credibility to the folklore. The island's mysteries were no longer confined to superstition, they were documented, undeniable, and terrifyingly consistent. Despite these warnings, outsiders continued to arrive, emboldened by ambition or desperation. Some were drawn by scientific curiosity, eager to test the claims of legends and observe the island's ecosystem firsthand. Others sought isolation, hoping to carve out a personal utopia free from society's constraints. What they encountered, however, was far more subtle and insidious than violent storms or hidden predators. Many settlers reported feelings of being watched, an ever-present awareness that their movements were monitored. Some claimed to hear their names whispered in the night, even when no other humans were near. Attempts to rationalize these occurrences often failed. The island's influence seemed to penetrate both mind and body, creating doubt, fear, and sometimes outright terror. Among the more famous cases was that of Reverend Harlan Moore, who arrived with his family seeking refuge and a place to establish a small chapel. Moore had dismissed the island's legends as nonsense, believing that faith and moral fortitude could withstand any environmental hardship. Within weeks, however, the Moore family experienced unexplainable events: bells ringing in the empty chapel, footsteps echoing through vacant corridors, and shadows that lingered longer than light should allow. Reverend Moore's journal, later recovered from a nearby settlement, described his gradual descent into fear. "I preached to my flock with a trembling voice, yet I wondered if any were left to hear me. We are not alone, though none stand before me." Within a month, the entire family vanished. Only the chapel remained, untouched and eerily silent, as if waiting for the next visitors. These legends, reinforced by repeated disappearances, began to shape the island's reputation far beyond its physical boundaries. Cartographers labeled it with warnings, government records noted it as a site of repeated human loss. Traders and sailors avoided its shores, and parents cautioned children not to dream of settling there. Yet the allure of the unknown remained irresistible. The tension between fear and curiosity became a defining feature of the island's legacy. It was a paradox: the more dangerous the land, the more determined some were to explore it, convinced they could succeed where others had failed. By the end of this period, the island had become more than a location, it was a psychological force. Its legends created a landscape where the unseen, the whispered, and the imagined held as much power as the physical terrain. Survivors' accounts, local folklore, and early scientific reports all pointed to one conclusion: the island did not simply kill or displace settlers. It manipulated perception, preyed on ambition and hope, and left a lingering dread that followed anyone who had set foot there. Each story ended on the same haunting note: those who underestimated the island's influence were never seen again. And so, as the 19th century progressed, the island's curse, or its inexplicable danger, became an accepted truth. People began to speak not of chance or misfortune, but of deliberate selection, as if the land itself chose its victims. This slow, creeping horror set the stage for the next wave of settlers, scientists, skeptics, and adventurers who would arrive armed with knowledge, only to discover that the island's legends were far closer to reality than anyone could imagine. The unanswered questions multiplied: was the island sentient? Did it harbor spirits? Or was it merely a natural environment so hostile, so alien, that the human mind could scarcely comprehend its lethality? Whatever the answer, one certainty remained: those who ventured there would be tested in ways that defied logic, and few would emerge unscathed. By the mid-19th century, the island had become a magnet for those driven by curiosity, ambition, or a stubborn refusal to heed warnings. Among the newcomers were scientists, explorers, and adventurers, each armed with equipment, journals, and a confident belief that human ingenuity could conquer nature, or at least explain it. One such group, led by Dr. Nathaniel Hargrove, arrived with instruments to study flora, fauna, and geological formations. Hargrove, a rational man by all accounts, dismissed the island's notorious history as exaggerated tales, insisting that observation and data collection could illuminate the mysteries that had claimed so many lives. But the island had its own rules, and no amount of science could grant immunity. The initial days seemed almost mundane. Settlers built shelters along the shore, catalogued plant life, and measured tides. Yet subtle anomalies began to emerge. Instruments malfunctioned inexplicably, barometers fluctuated without apparent cause, compasses spun erratically, and thermometers indicated temperatures that defied logic. Shadows lengthened unnaturally at noon, and fog would rise from the cliffs in shapes that suggested movement. Dr. Hargrove dismissed these at first, attributing them to environmental quirks or faulty equipment. But even he could not ignore the pattern: every observation, every attempt to record data, coincided with small, disconcerting disappearances. The first vanished were not people, but animals. Hargrove's collection of lab rabbits, brought from the mainland for experiments, disappeared overnight, leaving nothing behind, not a paw print, not a strand of fur. Then came the chickens, the goats, and the family dogs of other settlers who had arrived with the scientific expedition. The island seemed to take measure of what was placed upon it, removing what it deemed unnecessary or intrusive. When humans vanished, it was subtler yet more chilling. Dr. Hargrove recorded the disappearance of Elias Thornton, a young assistant tasked with collecting soil samples. Thornton had set out for a nearby cove, leaving behind his tools and journal. When the team searched, they found footprints leading into dense underbrush, but the trail ended abruptly. It was as though the island had swallowed him whole, leaving no evidence of struggle or flight. Psychological strain began to escalate. Settlers reported hearing voices calling their names, sometimes in the middle of the night, sometimes while they worked alone. Shadows moved just beyond the field of vision, prompting frantic double-takes and tense silence. Hargrove's journal entries grow increasingly erratic, reflecting mounting anxiety and doubt. I have measured tides, catalogued species, and yet I cannot explain the phenomenon that stalks us. The island watches, it waits, and I fear it knows more about us than we know about ourselves. Sleep became scarce. Settlers were haunted by dreams of vanished companions, of hands reaching from fog, of distant cries that seemed real enough to pull them from bed into the pre-dawn darkness. Attempts to leave the island were met with their own perils. Boats were launched only to capsize under calm waters, sails shredded by sudden squalls, or hulls pierced by unseen hazards. Even returning to the mainland seemed a risk, as the coastline itself resisted navigation. Many believed the island exerted a subtle control over reality, bending perception and creating physical obstacles to ensure its isolation remained absolute. A small detachment of sailors sent to evacuate the expedition returned with a chilling message: no one left the shore alive. They were here, and then they weren't. The island will not let them go. Panic settled over the remaining settlers, replacing curiosity with terror. As the weeks progressed, the island's influence seemed to intensify, targeting human psychology as keenly as it did physical presence. Settlers began turning on one another, suspicion mounting over each new anomaly. Tools misplaced or destroyed became accusations, fleeting glimpses of shadows became proof of sabotage, and whispered voices bred paranoia. Dr. Hargrove documented fights, mistrust, and mental breakdowns, noting that the island did not need to act directly, its very atmosphere corrupted cohesion and reason. Humans, he observed, were collapsing under the weight of unseen forces, often disappearing in moments of isolation or panic. Then came the shocking disappearances of entire groups. One morning, a team tasked with cataloging plant specimens was discovered missing, their journals left behind, open mid-entry. Their tools were scattered, but no bodies were ever recovered. Hargrove noted with horror that these vanishings coincided with moments of apparent triumph: samples collected, notes completed, careful planning executed. The island, it seemed, could only tolerate fleeting success before reasserting dominance. Survivors began whispering of patterns, of rhythms to the disappearances, but no one could predict when it would strike next. It was as if the land itself was testing them, measuring their resolve, and punishing them accordingly. Amid the escalating terror, the island revealed other, subtler phenomena. Rocks and trees appeared to shift overnight, creating paths that led nowhere or circles that returned travelers to the same starting point. Water collected in pools that reflected scenes from the past, ghostly images of vanished settlers, frozen in time. Some claimed to hear distant laughter or cries from places no one could reach. Hargrove's assistants, initially rational and scientific, began to believe the land was alive, observing every action, aware of every fear. Even skeptics confessed to moments of paralyzing dread, when the island seemed to look into their very thoughts, unearthing secrets they had never spoken aloud. As desperation mounted, a handful of settlers attempted more aggressive measures, clearing forests, erecting barricades, and even constructing rudimentary alarm systems. Each effort failed spectacularly. Paths were blocked by fallen trees, shelters disappeared overnight, and alarms rang without cause, sometimes at odd hours of the night. Survivors began to speak openly of the island's sentience. Hargrove's final journal entries, written in a hand that trembled with terror, read, "It is no longer merely land. It has awareness, intention, and patience. We are but intruders, and the price of intrusion is complete erasure. There is no reasoning with it. There is only survival, and even that may be an illusion." By the end of the 19th century, the legacy of these attempts had left the island thoroughly feared. Every scientific expedition, every settlement attempt, ended in disappearance or madness. Accounts were collected, cross-referenced, and archived, forming a chilling record. Humans could attempt to master the land, study it, or even evade it, but the island always claimed what it wanted. Its victims left behind journals, letters, and reports, all telling the same story: a place indifferent to human ambition, patient and deliberate, exacting a toll that no one could predict. Even today, these accounts remain among the most baffling in historical records of uninhabitable lands. As Hargrove's final entry concludes, a question lingers over all those who dared venture: was the island's power natural, supernatural, or something beyond comprehension? Could a rational mind ever truly reconcile the loss of entire families, explorers, and settlers? Or was this place simply a living nightmare, patiently enduring, observing, and eliminating any who dared to trespass? The answers remain unknown. The island's history is one of repeated failures, of human hope meeting a force that no measure, tool, or understanding could overcome, and it is precisely this enduring mystery that continues to draw attention, even centuries later, to the forbidden land that refuses to yield. By the time the island's 19th-century expeditions ended, what remained was not just a tally of vanishings, but a mosaic of human stories, faces, hopes, and dreams swallowed by the fog. The survivors' accounts reveal the intimate tragedies, the small details that transformed nameless statistics into haunting memories. Among them was Lydia Farr, a young woman who had journeyed alone, seeking to cultivate rare medicinal herbs she believed could cure illnesses that plagued her village. Her letters spoke of hope, of tending plants under sunlight that filtered through dense fog, of a quiet joy found in isolation. Yet soon, the island began to intrude, subtle at first: a missing watering can, footprints in places she had never walked, shadows stretching across the soil even when the sun was high. Lydia's experiences mirrored those of many others, showing a chilling pattern: the island did not strike violently at first. It tested, it observed, it toyed. She wrote of hearing laughter echo through empty valleys, whispers of her own name carried on the wind, and fleeting glimpses of figures at the edge of vision. These figures, sometimes children, sometimes adults, always just beyond recognition, vanished whenever approached. Lydia's journal entries became increasingly fragmented: I feel watched. I am alone, yet not alone. The trees move where I do not. I cannot trust my own eyes. Weeks later, her cabin was found abandoned, her herb garden trampled, and her belongings scattered in the surrounding forest. Nothing else remained. Then there was the story of Thomas and Mary Caldwell, a young couple who had arrived with dreams of building a home and raising a family. They were practical and resourceful, constructing a small cabin near the shore. Their neighbors initially admired their diligence and optimism. Yet even they could not escape the island's influence. One evening, Mary recounted hearing Thomas calling her from the woods. She ran toward the voice, only to find it coming from a direction that did not align with the landscape. As she approached, the sound ceased, replaced by silence that pressed against her ears like a physical weight. When Thomas did not return by nightfall, panic overtook her. The next morning, the cabin was empty, belongings intact, but the couple gone without a trace. The island had claimed them, and no one could explain how. Families and individuals alike shared the same fates. Widowers, like Elijah Cartwright, attempted to protect themselves with isolation and vigilance, yet succumbed to the same subtle, unrelenting forces. A diary entry from Cartwright reads, I have locked the doors, stayed awake in shifts, yet the fear does not relent. I feel eyes upon me even when none should be near. The land itself conspires, and I know my time is short. Within days, he disappeared. Only his journal remained, found months later, water-stained and smeared with ink, a testament to the slow erosion of hope that the island imposed on all who dared remain. Children were not spared. Witnesses from passing ships described hearing laughter carried on the wind, small voices echoing across cliffs and coves, yet no children were ever found. The disappearances of the young were particularly haunting to survivors, who remarked on the unnerving silence that replaced once lively homes. For parents and guardians, the loss was complete: no trail, no footprints, no clues, only the unbearable knowledge that something beyond comprehension had taken them. Emotional bonds, normally protective, proved powerless. The island did not distinguish by age, vulnerability, or affection. Every human who entered its realm was equally susceptible. The psychological toll on those who remained, even briefly, was profound. Settlers spoke of sleepless nights, the constant sense of being observed, and hallucinations that felt painfully real. Shadows elongated unnaturally, objects moved without cause, and whispers carried promises or threats, always personalized, always targeting the deepest fears of the listener. Some attempted to resist by writing letters, leaving notes, or marking trails. Others tried to use tools, measuring devices, and primitive surveillance, but the island seemed aware, responsive, and adaptive. There was no single pattern to outwit, only the slow accumulation of dread, compounded by the vanishing of companions one by one. The intensity of these experiences is amplified by the intimate perspective of individual accounts. Lydia's terror, Thomas and Mary Caldwell's despair, Elijah Cartwright's meticulous but futile precautions, all humanized the broader pattern of disappearance. They were not faceless victims, they were people with hopes, fears, and complex inner lives. Their stories remind us that the island's horror was not merely physical, it was deeply emotional, psychological, and inescapable. The audience feels the slow-burn anxiety of waiting for a door to open, a shadow to move, or a whispered name to echo in the dark. Every detail is a thread in the tapestry of suspense, binding viewers to the lives that once existed and the terror that erased them. Some survivors attempted to leave accounts for posterity, hoping to warn others. They wrote letters and journals, describing not only the physical oddities but the emotional torment. One fragment reads, "I do not know if I will survive the night. The land watches, and the fog listens. I hear voices that are not mine. I do not know if I am awake or dreaming." These writings, often discovered later, provide both a historical record and a psychological case study, showing how the island preyed on every facet of human existence. Its influence extended beyond the body, infiltrating thoughts, emotions, and perceptions. By humanizing these victims, the horror becomes tangible. The island is no longer merely a backdrop, it interacts with people, shaping their experiences, exploiting vulnerabilities, and exacting a precise toll. Each account reinforces the suspense. The audience is not merely watching history, they are invited to inhabit it, to feel the dread of someone standing alone on cliffs, hearing footsteps that vanish the moment they turn. The tension is cumulative, building toward a point where the audience anticipates the next disappearance, the next inexplicable phenomenon, the next human tragedy. And yet, for all the despair, the stories also contain fleeting moments of resilience, humor, and hope, which make the losses all the more poignant. Lydia tended her herbs with care, the Caldwells shared quiet evenings by the fire, Cartwright maintained a strict routine, all attempts to assert control, to impose humanity on an indifferent force. The failure of these attempts underscores the island's ultimate power. It is patient, deliberate, and unyielding. Every human story, full of depth, emotion, and relatability, serves to amplify the tension and the horror, preparing the audience for the increasingly intense events that follow in later sections. As the first waves of settlers faded into the mist, the island's legend grew more compelling. It was no longer only a place of geographic or environmental interest, it became a psychological enigma, a dark mirror reflecting human hope and vulnerability. The cumulative effect of these personal stories is haunting. By giving faces, motivations, and inner thoughts to the vanished, the audience experiences the island's menace on an intimate level. And as the narrative moves toward the investigations and scientific attempts of later years, this emotional depth ensures that each new disappearance carries the weight of human tragedy, amplifying suspense, engagement, and the desire to understand what force, or forces, claim the island's victims. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the stories of vanished settlers, doomed expeditions, and inexplicable phenomena had reached the attention of authorities. Local governments, initially dismissive, began to take a more formal interest. Reports of disappearances were no longer anecdotal, they were consistent, documented, and impossible to ignore. Coast guards, law enforcement, and scientific commissions began planning expeditions, aiming to uncover the truth behind the island's terrifying reputation. But the island, patient and indifferent, had a history of testing human resolve. What awaited the investigators was a puzzle that would challenge their understanding of both nature and reality itself. The first formal investigation was undertaken by a government-appointed survey team. They arrived equipped with maps, compasses, and observation instruments, determined to study the terrain methodically and uncover any evidence of prior settlers. Initially, their reports were clinical, detailing the rugged cliffs, dense forests, and treacherous coves. Yet subtle anomalies began almost immediately. Compasses spun without reason, instruments failed inexplicably, and tents were mysteriously displaced overnight. Minor disturbances were dismissed as natural, until the first investigator vanished. A biologist, meticulous and cautious, had gone to survey a rock formation along the northern coast. His notes ended abruptly, footprints led into dense foliage, then simply stopped, as though the land had absorbed him. The psychological impact on the remaining investigators was profound. Fear, doubt, and suspicion began to creep in. They recorded sounds that had no source, rustling leaves when the air was still, faint whispers calling their names, and the sudden cracking of branches in areas where no one had walked. Some began to question their own senses. Were the phenomena real, or was the island preying on their minds? Journals reveal increasing paranoia, teams split to cover more ground, only to return with members missing, their paths leading nowhere, their last steps recorded in disjointed, eerie patterns. The island, it seemed, had not only physical dominion, it wielded psychological control. Attempts to trace the missing were equally baffling. Search parties found footprints that led to cliffs, then simply vanished in mid-step. Makeshift barriers, carefully erected to track movement, were found destroyed or displaced without explanation. Tools left on the ground were gone the next morning, replaced by objects that had never existed in the first place, rocks shaped unnaturally, trees bearing strange marks, and signs that seemed designed to confuse. Investigators began documenting these phenomena meticulously, noting the patterns of vanishings, the oddities in terrain, and the subtle psychological manipulations that suggested intelligence or intent behind the island's defenses. By this point, fear had evolved into a quiet terror, the land itself was actively resisting observation. Among the more chilling discoveries were the abandoned shelters of previous settlers. Investigators found cabins intact but empty, personal belongings carefully placed yet telling of abrupt departures. Food left cooking on stoves, tools positioned as if mid-task, and journals opened mid-sentence, all evidence that inhabitants had disappeared suddenly. In one remarkable case, a cabin revealed small footprints alongside adult-sized ones, suggesting that even children had been claimed. No logical explanation could account for the absence of bodies. Experts debated whether these were the results of natural disasters, secret predators, or some more sinister force. Yet the consistency and detail across multiple discoveries made clear, whatever claimed the settlers acted with precision and regularity. The team also encountered environmental anomalies that defied conventional understanding. Soil analysis revealed inexplicable composition shifts, water sources appeared to change location overnight, and plants were found uprooted or rearranged in geometrically improbable patterns. Trees were felled not by storms but with cuts that suggested careful intent. Shadows fell where they should not, fog lingered selectively, and sounds echoed in ways inconsistent with topography. Even seasoned explorers found themselves unnerved by these distortions. One observer noted, "The island's layout seems mutable, responding to our presence. Paths we thought familiar twist and loop upon themselves, as though we are walking in circles designed by a mind beyond our comprehension." Despite mounting evidence of danger, investigators pressed on, driven by curiosity, professional duty, or stubborn disbelief. They conducted surveys, collected soil and flora samples, and even attempted to establish a temporary observation camp. Yet the island's influence escalated with each attempt. One night, a campfire that had burned for hours was found extinguished without cause, while tents were slashed from within. The following morning, several investigators were missing, their journals left behind, pages smeared with mud and streaked with hurriedly written warnings. Footprints indicated rapid movement into dense forest, yet they led nowhere, ending abruptly, mid-stride, as if the earth itself had swallowed the individuals whole. Perhaps the most baffling element was the apparent intelligence behind these occurrences. Investigators reported feeling watched constantly, a sensation that persisted even in isolated areas. Some claimed the island seemed to anticipate their actions, attempts to map it systematically were thwarted, campsites became inaccessible overnight, and objects intentionally left in one location reappeared elsewhere. Observers documented fleeting glimpses of human-like figures, blurred or distorted, vanishing before they could be approached. Some journals hinted at a sentient presence, a being or force capable of perceiving and manipulating human behavior. Scientists, naturally skeptical, could not find a rational explanation. Yet they could not deny the pattern: the land acted with deliberate purpose. Investigators also discovered remnants of prior expeditions, notes, journals, and equipment left behind, many still in usable condition. These items told stories of similar disappearances, of psychological strain, and of failed attempts to comprehend the island. One remarkable journal described repeated attempts to measure sound, light, and shadow, only to have instruments fail in ways impossible to reconcile. Another detailed the precise disappearance of a child's footprints, mid-step, leaving a trail that abruptly ended on bare earth. These accounts reinforced the notion that the island's influence was consistent across decades, suggesting a force that was enduring, patient, and precise. By the conclusion of the most intensive investigations, authorities were forced to acknowledge the limits of human understanding. Expeditions left behind journals, maps, and scattered equipment, but no definitive answers. One government report, later declassified, stated bluntly, "The island defies measurement, observation, and comprehension. All personnel who have attempted to reside or explore it are at severe risk of disappearance. Its properties are inconsistent with known natural phenomena. Further attempts at occupation are not advised." Even rational minds, trained in science and exploration, had been humbled. The island had proven that it could resist human intrusion, shape perception, and claim lives with a precision that defied logic. The cumulative effect of these investigations was profound. First, they established that the disappearances were neither isolated nor accidental. Second, they reinforced the notion that the island possessed characteristics beyond conventional understanding, whether environmental, psychological, or otherwise. And third, they cemented the island's legacy as a place that was forbidden in practice if not yet formally. Survivors and observers alike were left with haunting questions: was the island sentient? Did it have a conscious intent? Were the disappearances purely natural phenomena, or something more sinister and deliberate? Despite the rigor of scientific inquiry, the answers remained elusive, leaving investigators both awed and terrified. And yet, even after all these attempts, the island continued to lure attention. Tales of vanished settlers, failed expeditions, and impossible phenomena persisted in newspapers, journals, and word of mouth. It became clear that this was not merely a place of danger, but a crucible of human psychology and ambition, where hope, courage, and curiosity were tested to their limits, and where failure carried an unthinkable cost. The investigators' findings, meticulously recorded, ensured that the island's reputation would endure, shaping public perception and providing a chilling foundation for the stories and mysteries that continue to surround it. By the early 20th century, the island's legend had taken on a life of its own, attracting attention from thrill-seekers, scholars, and even journalists. Each visitor arrived with the hope of uncovering a truth long obscured, only to confront phenomena that defied reason. The narrative shifted from disappearances alone to contradictions, mysteries layered upon mysteries, and subtle manipulations of perception that made reality itself unstable. Reports of strange lights, impossible landscapes, and vanishing settlers had accumulated for decades, yet the island had never yielded a coherent explanation. Instead, it had become a puzzle, one that challenged both logic and human endurance. Among the earliest modern attempts to study the island was a mixed team of scientists and journalists, led by Dr. Eleanor Whitman, a psychologist with a keen interest in the interplay of fear, perception, and isolation. Whitman's approach differed from prior expeditions. She documented not only environmental phenomena but also the psychological state of her team. From the outset, she noted an undercurrent of tension that seemed disproportionate to the environment itself. Instruments failed, notes went missing, and shadows moved independently of any source of light. Team members reported hearing whispers, voices calling their names, and, disturbingly, faint echoes of laughter belonging to people who were not present. Whitman began to hypothesize that the island might actively manipulate perception, creating a feedback loop of fear and anticipation that ensnared its inhabitants. Early on, the team encountered remnants of previous settlers, abandoned cabins, journals, and personal belongings. One particularly chilling find was a child's toy, left intact in the middle of a forest clearing, surrounded by footprints that abruptly ended. Whitman documented the object in detail, noting how it seemed deliberately staged to draw attention. This discovery prompted the first serious discussion of intent: could the island, or some unknown entity inhabiting it, be consciously interacting with humans? Or were these phenomena the product of collective psychological breakdowns, amplified by isolation and fear? Even the most rational members of the team could not dismiss the uncanny precision with which the land seemed to operate. As the days progressed, the tension intensified. Team members began reporting vivid hallucinations, images of vanished settlers appearing in the periphery of vision, fleeting shadows crossing paths, and auditory phenomena so precise that they seemed indistinguishable from reality. One young assistant, Samuel Green, wrote in his journal, "I see them everywhere, faces I do not recognize, yet familiar somehow. They speak, they move, and when I approach, they dissolve like mist. I am beginning to question what is real and what is not." Such accounts became increasingly common, with each observer noting unique, individualized experiences. The island seemed to tailor its influence, preying on personal fears, memories, and guilt, heightening the psychological stakes for every newcomer. Then came a discovery that shook the team to its core: a series of crude markings etched into rock faces across the island, appearing to form a pattern. Initially dismissed as natural fissures or random scratches, closer examination revealed repetitive symbols resembling an archaic alphabet. Some markings appeared to reference time, others seemed to encode spatial relationships. Whitman and her colleagues debated their meaning intensely. Could these be warnings left by previous visitors? Or messages from something native to the island itself? The very existence of such deliberate markings suggested intelligence, or at least a structure behind the island's otherwise chaotic behavior. This revelation introduced a new layer of terror: the land was not merely dangerous, it was potentially communicating, or even strategizing, with lethal precision. Conflicting theories began to emerge among the team. Some suggested that the island was a site of intense geological activity, producing mirages, sound distortions, and magnetic anomalies capable of disorienting humans and animals alike. Others argued for a psychological explanation: extreme isolation and the weight of accumulated local legends triggered mass hysteria, hallucinations, and the perceived disappearance of companions. Whitman, however, proposed a more radical idea: that the island possessed a form of consciousness, manifesting both physically and psychologically to interact with human intruders. Each theory carried its own horrors. Geological explanations implied human helplessness against forces of nature. Psychological explanations suggested that no mind could withstand its influence. Consciousness-based theories hinted at deliberate, intelligent manipulation beyond comprehension. The team's experiences escalated further when Samuel Green disappeared. His last journal entry described being drawn to a cove by whispers he could not resist. Footprints leading to the cove ended mid-step, with no trace of him beyond that point. Attempts to locate him failed, despite systematic searches. Whitman recorded in her notes, "The island does not take at random. It draws, it measures, it decides." Green's disappearance is precise, almost surgical in its execution. Other team members grew increasingly paranoid, their observations tinged with suspicion. Some began to believe that other members were somehow complicit or influenced by the island, heightening interpersonal tension and creating an atmosphere of distrust and fear. As exploration continued, more anomalies compounded the suspense. Objects moved without explanation, temporary shelters vanished or were found displaced, and natural formations appeared altered overnight. Rivers changed course subtly, rocks shifted as if rearranged, and vegetation grew in unnatural patterns. Whitman's team recorded repeated evidence of these changes, noting their precision and regularity. Observers could not dismiss them as coincidence. The island appeared to respond to human activity, adjusting its environment and influencing perception to maintain dominance over anyone attempting to inhabit or study it. One of the most alarming events involved what the team referred to as the echo. During a survey of the northern cliffs, Whitman and a small subgroup experienced a phenomenon in which every sound they made, footsteps, speech, laughter, was reflected back at them, distorted and delayed. Soon, these echoes began to mimic speech patterns not made by the group, uttering phrases like, "You do not belong here," and "Leave before it is too late." The psychological effect was immediate and profound. Team members panicked, their sense of time and space destabilized. Instruments recorded normal environmental conditions, but the human mind could not reconcile the auditory distortions with reality. The island, it seemed, had expanded its influence from the physical to the perceptual, blending tangible danger with mental manipulation. Whitman's journal entries during this period become almost literary in quality, a mix of scientific observation and subjective terror. The island tests, measures, and observes. It uses fear as a tool, shaping each moment to erode our certainty. I can no longer distinguish between what is real and what is constructed. Even this writing may be a hallucination, yet it is all I have left to assert my existence. The suspense of the narrative is magnified by these insights. The island is not merely a backdrop for tragedy, but an active participant, manipulating environment, perception, and psychology to ensure that every intruder faces incomprehensible tests. Then, in a twist that would cement the island's modern legend, the team discovered an anomalous cave network previously undocumented. Whitman theorized that this network could be responsible for many disappearances, a natural labyrinth that disorients, traps, and isolates. Yet exploration revealed something far more disturbing. Inside, inscriptions, skeletal remains, and belongings of settlers were found in patterns suggesting intentional placement. Some items were arranged as if for observation, others as markers, but no bodies matched any known records. It implied a system, a deliberate orchestration of human interaction with the landscape, further supporting the theory that the island was not passive, it actively managed who survived, who disappeared, and how its environment communicated danger. By the end of the expedition, the team was irrevocably changed. Members were missing, others had descended into hysteria, and Whitman herself recorded doubt about her own survival. Conflicting theories, shocking revelations, and first-hand experiences combined to create an overarching sense of terror and ambiguity. The island had revealed patterns, hinted at intelligence, manipulated perception, and claimed lives, yet remained inscrutable. For every explanation, there were counterexamples, for every observation, a contradiction. The suspense lingered, unresolved, leaving the island as both a physical location and a psychological enigma, its mysteries layered and persistent. In this section, the tension escalates to near unbearable levels. The audience experiences not only the threat of physical disappearance but also the terror of mental manipulation, conflicting interpretations, and the creeping realization that human understanding may never penetrate the island's secrets. Foreshadowing and callbacks to earlier vanishings, like those of Lydia Farr or the Caldwells, reinforce cohesion and replay value, allowing viewers to piece together patterns across decades of horror while still questioning whether any explanation can suffice. As Whitman's final observations reveal, the island had become a character in its own right, patient, deliberate, and inscrutable. It measured ambition, predated on curiosity, and rewarded caution with ambiguity rather than safety. Every disappearance, every psychological distortion, and every anomaly reinforced a narrative of suspense and tension. This was not merely land, not merely nature, but a force that defied classification. The shocking revelations, conflicting theories, and manipulated perception set the stage for the eventual decision by authorities to officially forbid settlement, ensuring that the island's legacy of mystery would endure well into the modern era. By the mid-20th century, after decades of disappearances, failed settlements, and baffling investigations, authorities finally recognized that the island was more than a geographic challenge, it was a place that defied conventional understanding. Cautionary tales, eyewitness accounts, and the meticulous journals of explorers like Dr. Eleanor Whitman had accumulated into a compelling dossier, detailing repeated patterns of vanishings, environmental anomalies, and psychological manipulations. The evidence was undeniable: the island could not safely support human habitation, and any attempt to challenge its dominance carried unacceptable risk. A formal decision was made to forbid settlement. Legal restrictions were enacted, and a government notice was circulated among shipping companies, local communities, and scientific organizations. The island was labeled off-limits, entry required special permits, and even then, strict guidelines dictated temporary observation only. This prohibition was not a casual warning, it was the culmination of centuries of documented failure. Yet, in true human fashion, curiosity and ambition remained undiminished. While most complied, a handful of researchers, thrill-seekers, and illegal settlers continued to venture onto the island, drawn by the allure of unsolved mysteries and the promise of discovery. Modern investigations brought new technologies and methodologies to bear, adding layers of insight while preserving the island's enigmatic reputation. Aerial surveys revealed unusual land formations, coves, cliffs, and forests arranged in patterns that seemed geometrically improbable. Magnetic and gravitational studies detected anomalies inconsistent with surrounding regions. Remote cameras and motion sensors were deployed, yet even these yielded perplexing results. Equipment malfunctioned, footage captured inexplicable movement, and some recordings showed individuals who had vanished, appearing only as faint silhouettes before disappearing from view entirely. The island had adapted to technological surveillance, as if it were aware of these attempts to observe and intervene. One of the most compelling modern cases involved a scientific team in the 1970s, who attempted to establish a temporary research station. Initial findings suggested fertile soil, abundant wildlife, and navigable terrain, encouraging signs. Yet within weeks, members reported inexplicable occurrences, tents shifted locations overnight, supplies vanished without trace, and disorienting sounds echoed across the cliffs. The most unsettling events were psychological. Individuals experienced hallucinations, hearing voices in the wind or seeing fleeting images of previous settlers, some of whom had disappeared more than a century prior. By the end of the expedition, several members had abandoned the station, some with permanent psychological scars, others missing entirely. The cumulative effect of these modern investigations reinforced the island's reputation as a place where conventional science collided with phenomena beyond explanation. Researchers noted a persistent pattern: newcomers were drawn in by curiosity or necessity, but the island responded in subtle, precise, and unpredictable ways. Disappearances often followed the establishment of temporary success, completing a survey, building a structure, or navigating a tricky passage. These incidents were never violent in the conventional sense. The island did not attack, it assimilated, erased, or redirected. Human presence was never tolerated beyond a fleeting moment, reinforcing the idea of deliberate intelligence or environmental design beyond current comprehension. Authorities, despite repeated warnings, faced challenges in enforcement. Coastal patrols occasionally observed small boats near the island, only to find them empty or abandoned on the shore. Local fishermen reported faint cries, moving lights, or inexplicable fog banks that seemed to follow intruders at sea. Even modern equipment failed to consistently detect human activity, suggesting that the island's influence extended beyond mere physical presence into perception itself. These anomalies fueled media coverage, public fascination, and a growing mythos, making the island simultaneously forbidden and irresistible, a magnet for the curious and the foolhardy alike. Despite strict prohibitions, a handful of brave, or reckless, individuals continued to attempt exploration. Their accounts, often fragmented, confirmed a continuity of experience with earlier settlers. Shadows shifted, voices called names, and objects moved without cause. Some reported visions of previous inhabitants, echoing events from centuries prior. These testimonies suggested that the island preserved memory, or at least maintained continuity in its manipulation of human perception. Observers described a haunting sense of déjà vu, as if the land itself remembered and replayed prior human activity, reinforcing suspense and mystery across generations. A modern psychological perspective added new dimensions to the narrative. Studies suggested that prolonged exposure to isolation, environmental disorientation, and the pressure of prior legends could heighten susceptibility to hallucinations and paranoia. Yet even controlled experiments could not fully account for the precision or consistency of reported phenomena. Footprints ended mid-step, objects reappeared displaced, and vanished explorers were never found, outcomes incompatible with purely psychological or environmental explanations. Researchers began to recognize the island as a complex system, operating at the intersection of natural law, human cognition, and inexplicable forces, a setting uniquely suited to suspense, tension, and ongoing speculation. Some contemporary theories attempted to reconcile the contradictions. One posited that the island existed in a unique geological or electromagnetic niche, creating disorienting illusions and auditory phenomena. Another suggested a persistent psychological imprint, where fear, legend, and memory interacted to produce real-world consequences, effectively trapping human perception. Yet a more radical view argued for a form of intelligence embedded in the island itself, a sentience that acted to protect its solitude, manipulate intruders, and preserve its mystery. Each theory carried implications that amplified suspense, whether environmental, psychological, or sentient. The island's influence was undeniable and fatal to those who underestimated it. In recent years, the island has remained largely untouched, with legal enforcement preventing settlement and only limited scientific observation permitted. Even with modern technology, satellite imaging, drones, and remote sensors, the island retains an aura of mystery. Some footage shows fleeting lights, irregular terrain shifts, or unexplained movement, while other studies reveal patterns that defy conventional explanation. The island continues to withhold its deepest secrets, maintaining suspense and tension for researchers, storytellers, and audiences alike. It exists as a living paradox, at once real and incomprehensible, a geographic location that resists both human domination and understanding. Public fascination endures, fueled by decades of storytelling, first-hand accounts, and documented disappearances. The island has become a cultural symbol, representing the limits of human knowledge, the fragility of perception, and the persistent allure of the unknown. Books, articles, and documentaries draw on its history, emphasizing suspense, tension, and character-driven narratives. Each new story connects to previous disappearances, creating layers of mystery and continuity. The island's reputation has thus evolved from local legend to global enigma, a place where curiosity invites danger, and where the past, present, and perception of reality intersect in ways that defy explanation. Ultimately, the prohibition against settlement reflects a recognition that the island is not merely hazardous, but fundamentally beyond human control. Attempts to inhabit it have consistently failed, despite centuries of persistence, technological advancement, and rational planning. Disappearances, environmental anomalies, and psychological manipulation persist as hallmarks of the island's influence. By combining documented evidence, modern observations, and historical accounts, the narrative solidifies the island as a unique locus of suspense, mystery, and ongoing fascination, a place where curiosity meets danger, and human ambition meets the unfathomable. As the 20th century gave way to the 21st, the island remains officially forbidden, yet continues to inspire exploration and speculation. Scholars debate theories, journalists revisit accounts, and thrill-seekers attempt to observe from a distance. Yet for all attempts to explain or penetrate its secrets, the core reality remains unchanged. The island does not yield to human expectation, remains impervious to rational explanation, and preserves its history of vanishings, legends, and psychological terror. Its mysteries endure, ensuring that the island continues to captivate, terrify, and enthrall all who dare to imagine what lies beyond the fog. As we approach the end of this story, the island emerges not merely as a location, but as a living enigma, its cliffs, forests, and fog-shrouded coves serving as a stage for centuries of human hope, curiosity, and tragedy. The vanished settlers, explorers, and investigators are more than historical footnotes, they are the emotional core of this tale. Their dreams, fears, and struggles transform the island from a remote landmass into a theater of suspense, where every shadow and sound carries weight, and where every decision can lead to an irreversible disappearance. Modern observers, whether scientists, journalists, or adventurers, report the same haunting phenomena documented over centuries. Shadows move where they shouldn't, whispers call names that no one spoke, and objects appear, disappear, or relocate with impossible precision. Footprints halt abruptly on bare ground, animals vanish without trace, compasses spin uncontrollably. Even the most technologically equipped teams cannot overcome the island's influence. It is not merely dangerous, it is fundamentally incomprehensible, a force that challenges both the mind and the senses. The cumulative effect of these historical and contemporary accounts is a powerful emotional resonance. Lydia Farr tending her herbs, the Caldwells' desperate search for one another, Dr. Eleanor Whitman meticulously documenting psychological phenomena, they all converge in a narrative that is both intimate and expansive. Viewers feel the tension in each step across cliffs, the dread in each solitary night, and the quiet horror of disappearing without a trace. These stories humanize the mystery, creating empathy that anchors the suspense. The audience is not only witnessing events, they are emotionally participating, imagining themselves within the island's eerie, unpredictable grasp. Yet the island is more than a series of terrifying events, it is a mirror reflecting human ambition, curiosity, and fear. Each new expedition sought knowledge, territory, or fame, only to encounter limits that tested both reason and resilience. The island rewards neither cleverness nor courage, it operates on a logic that is entirely its own, selectively permitting observation, vanishing settlers, and manipulating perception. For centuries, humans have been drawn to it, compelled by the same combination of fascination and hubris that defines our species. Its legends endure because they touch something primal, the tension between desire for discovery and the inherent danger of the unknown. Even in Prohibition, the island's story continues to captivate. Legal restrictions, government oversight, and modern technology have not diminished its mystery, they have amplified it. Restricted access has turned the island into a forbidden shrine, a place where curiosity is tested against patience, and where every attempt to understand is shadowed by the knowledge of countless failures before. Every journal, map, or anecdote now carries layers of suspense and foreshadowing. What befell Lydia, the Caldwells, or Whitman's team becomes a silent warning for the next visitor, creating continuity that rewards attentive observers and adds replay value to every telling of the story. The island's enduring horror lies not only in its physical dangers, but in its psychological and emotional impact. Observers report lasting trauma, nightmares, and an inability to reconcile experience with explanation. Even those who survive return altered, their perceptions reshaped, their confidence in rationality shaken. Modern psychologists studying the phenomenon emphasize the combination of isolation, environmental disorientation, and the weight of cumulative legend as triggers for extreme stress and hallucination. Yet the consistency of documented disappearances and physical anomalies suggests something more, a deliberate, persistent, and inexplicable force. The ambiguity is the heart of the suspense, the island remains unsolved, resisting closure, leaving both survivors and audiences with an unshakable sense of unease. The island's mythos is further enriched by its cultural imprint. Tales of vanished settlers, impossible terrain, and uncanny phenomena have influenced literature, documentaries, and media portrayals worldwide. Each retelling amplifies suspense, emphasizing the slow-burn horror of vanishings and the lingering dread of uncertainty. The island is a character in every story, patient, unyielding, and deliberate. Its mysteries transcend generations, linking the ambitions of 19th-century settlers to the inquiries of modern scientists. This temporal continuity adds narrative depth, creating a cohesive cinematic experience in which the past, present, and imagination converge. Perhaps the most haunting element is the unresolved question, what exactly claims these humans, and why? Theories abound, geological anomalies, psychological manipulation, sentient landscapes, but no explanation is universally accepted. This ambiguity is not a flaw, it is the source of lasting intrigue. By leaving critical questions unanswered, the narrative sustains suspense and encourages viewers to revisit accounts, reanalyze patterns, and speculate about forces beyond comprehension. Each reading or viewing reveals subtle foreshadowing, callbacks, and hints, making the story richly replayable while deepening the emotional and intellectual engagement. The story concludes on a paradoxical note. The island is forbidden yet irresistible, deadly yet compelling. Its cliffs and forests are silent witnesses to centuries of human ambition and failure. The vanished are never found, the anomalies remain unexplained, and every attempt at understanding only deepens the mystery. It is a landscape of suspense, tension, and emotional weight, a place where history, psychology, and legend intertwine. The island's power lies not in spectacle alone, but in its patient accumulation of human experience, its manipulation of perception, and the haunting absence left in the wake of every disappearance. In the final analysis, the island embodies the eternal tension between curiosity and danger, knowledge and fear, presence and absence. Its legacy is preserved not only in documents and reports, but in the imagination of every viewer who contemplates its mysteries. By humanizing the victims, emphasizing suspense, and maintaining ambiguity, the narrative ensures that the island is more than a location, it is a cinematic experience, an emotional journey, and a psychological enigma. The audience is left with the lingering chill of uncertainty. The island is out there, still observing, still waiting, and still claiming those who underestimate its depth. And so, the story ends not with resolution, but with reflection and dread. The vanished settlers, the failed expeditions, and the modern investigations converge into a haunting tableau, a place where time, perception, and reality collide, where human ambition meets forces beyond comprehension, and where the unknown is preserved, deliberate and patient. For every reader or viewer, the question remains, could you resist the allure, or would you, too, vanish in the fog-shrouded cliffs of the island that refuses to yield? Even after centuries of study, documentation, and observation, the island refuses to be fully understood. It exists as both a place and an idea, a site where human ambition collides with forces beyond comprehension. Section 11 serves not just as a narrative closure, but as a reflective epilogue, exploring the enduring fascination, the lingering questions, and the psychological imprint left by a land that consumes lives and legends alike. Visitors and observers in the modern era often speak of an intangible aura, a presence that is felt more than seen. Some describe a tension in the air, subtle shifts in the fog, or a sense of being watched even from a safe distance. Local folklore, shaped over generations, has become intertwined with formal investigations. Ghost stories, whispered warnings, and anecdotal accounts amplify suspense and maintain the island's reputation as a forbidden, haunted place. The cultural weight of these narratives ensures that the island is more than geographic, it is a psychological landmark, a collective symbol of the unknown. Modern adventurers and researchers continue to be drawn to it, despite prohibitions. Scientists equipped with drones, satellite imaging, and remote monitoring devices still encounter anomalies, sudden equipment malfunctions, inexplicable movements of flora and fauna, or fleeting human-like silhouettes that vanish before analysis. These experiences mirror the historical accounts of vanished settlers and investigators, creating continuity across centuries. Each modern encounter reinforces the pattern: the island resists human understanding, adapts to observation, and preserves its mysteries with deliberate precision. Psychologists and historians alike have examined why the island continues to captivate. Some argue it is the human desire to confront the unknown, others point to the suspenseful legacy of disappearances, which inspires both fear and curiosity. By humanizing the victims and survivors, the island's narrative taps into universal emotions, dread, empathy, and fascination with forces beyond control. This combination makes the story highly replayable and compelling, encouraging viewers to revisit accounts and piece together clues, even while knowing that full comprehension may be impossible. Section 11 also emphasizes lingering questions. What truly causes the disappearances? Is the island sentient, a natural anomaly, or a psychological trap? Could its patterns be predicted, or are they inherently unknowable? By leaving these questions unresolved, the epilogue maintains tension and suspense, inviting the audience to contemplate the limits of knowledge. The unanswered mysteries serve as both a narrative hook and a thematic statement. Some forces, no matter how investigated or measured, remain beyond human control. The island's impact is not limited to individual stories, it has shaped exploration, science, and cultural imagination. It has challenged the assumptions of generations, forcing observers to reconsider the relationship between human ambition and natural or supernatural forces. Its narrative has inspired literature, documentaries, and investigative journalism, emphasizing suspense, character-driven storytelling, and emotional engagement. By blending historical accounts, personal narratives, and modern observations, the island becomes a multidimensional experience, both a case study in unexplained phenomena and a deeply human story of curiosity, fear, and consequence. The epilogue also serves to solidify the emotional and psychological payoff. Readers and viewers are reminded of the intimate stakes, families torn apart, individuals driven to terror, and investigators challenged beyond reason. These personal stories resonate with the audience, creating empathy and reinforcing the suspense. Unlike other mysteries that rely solely on spectacle, the island's story derives horror from human vulnerability, emotional depth, and the relentless inevitability of its influence. Finally, Section 11 underscores the paradoxical nature of the island. It is forbidden, yet compelling. Dangerous, yet alluring. Obscure, yet meticulously documented. It represents the ultimate challenge to human perception and ambition. By highlighting these contrasts, the epilogue provides a haunting conclusion that is both satisfying and unsettling. The island remains untamed, its secrets intact, and its legacy enduring. The audience is left with a sense of awe, fear, and reflection, imagining what it would be like to stand at its foggy cliffs, aware that the land itself might be observing them, measuring, and perhaps deciding who will vanish next. The story closes with a final, cinematic reflection. The island is more than a location, it is a narrative, a psychological puzzle, and a repository of human ambition and fear. Its mysteries persist, ensuring that each telling carries suspense, emotional weight, and curiosity. The epilogue leaves viewers with a haunting thought: the vanished are gone, the anomalies remain, and the island continues its quiet dominion, an eternal, patient enigma that no one can fully conquer, and no one should underestimate.